Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa, welcome to the Kingdom of Bahrain. I'm delighted to be part of the 18th Manama Dialogue. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. John Chipman and the IISS team for organizing the dialogue. Our strong relationship with the IISS spans over 2 decades. I can hardly believe this. The Manama Dialogue is the region's leading security forum. A warm welcome to President Ursula von der Leyen, to the Kingdom of Bahrain. We are honored to have you with us today. Each year, the Manama Dialogue puts forward a thought-provoking agenda, and this year is no different. The agenda is filled with issues that need to be addressed if not solved. His Majesty the King reiterates his call for peace and coexistence. I would like to use this podium to reiterate His Majesty's call during the historical visit of His Holiness Pope Francis to the Kingdom of Bahrain. The Kingdom of Bahrain consistently emphasizes the importance of international partnership based on diplomatic dialogue and peaceful means as the starting point to end wars and conflicts, and pursues the path of fraternity, understanding, respect for sovereignty of states, good neighborliness, and non-interference in internal affairs. In this context, we call on major world power to maintain international peace and security, and in particular to end the Russian-Ukrainian war and to begin serious negotiations between the two parties. The Kingdom of Bahrain will not hesitate to play any role required in this regard. And today, I bring with me His Majesty's spirit of this message and would like to echo its sentiment. The Kingdom of Bahrain stands ready to do its part to promote peace and coexistence. Bahrain is ready to be the meeting ground and a friend to all. So I would like to end on that note and give the floor to Dr. Chipman, and thank you very much.
Your Royal Highnesses, Your Excellencies, Lord, ladies and gentlemen, it is also my pleasure to welcome you to the opening dinner of the 18th IISS Manama Dialogue. All of us at the IISS are grateful for the remarks just offered by His Highness Sheikh Nasser bin Hamad Al Khalifa, His Majesty the King's representative for Charitable and Youth Affairs and National Security Advisor of the Kingdom of Bahrain. Thank you very much, sir. Allow me to thank His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa bin Salman Al Khalifa, His Royal Highness Prince Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa, the Crown Prince and Prime Minister, and the government and people of Bahrain for their support to the IISS in organizing this splendid annual international security and regional diplomatic summit. The IISS, headquartered in London and with offices in Berlin, Singapore, Washington, and Manama, has had another excellent year. In particular, our work on GCC defense, China's technology push, and the place of cyber in national strategy has been path-breaking. From our new office in Paris-Platz, Berlin, we are bringing fresh analysis to the heart of the European security debate. We were delighted that in March we conducted a Riyadh Defense Forum on Day 0 of the World Defense Show in Saudi Arabia. This showcased IISS analysis on defense policy and defense economics across 11 Middle Eastern states, engaging some 250 delegates. In September, we brought together the national security establishments of India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Sri Lanka to our annual South Asia conference in Muscat, Oman. Our Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore this year was superb. During his keynote address, Prime Minister Kishida of Japan issued the memorable warning, "Ukraine today could be Asia tomorrow," a phrase he repeated only a week later at the Madrid NATO summit. The IISS database styled China Connects carries well over 7,500 data points mapping China's digital Silk Road. The Military Balance Plus and the expert analysis that surrounds it remain iconic references. In Manama, we launched earlier today our Armed Conflict Survey. I invite you all to look out for one of our next publications entitled On Offensive Cyber, written by a former Deputy Director of GCHQ, which will be seen as the best unclassified assessment of the way cyber operations are conducted today. Our analytical strength derives from our strong strategic thinking tradition rooted in our UK base, combined with a truly international staff. When examining geopolitical and geoeconomic trends, we can bring this native understanding of local circumstances into our assessments. That allows us to be international in our perspective, reach, and impact. We try, where possible, to act as strategic translators, seeking to explain why some issues are looked at very differently in other parts of the world. We put great effort into our international dialogues precisely to achieve a stronger trans-regional consensus on how to think about big strategic issues. Even within Europe, that task of strategic translation is important. Immediately after Russia invaded Ukraine in February this year, it was the Northern European and Baltic states that became the strongest advocates of a robust response. After all, it had been President Niinistö of Finland already on 1 January 2022 who had provided elements of this evolving strategic thought leadership in his New Year speech. Then he counseled that whenever avoidance of war has been the primary objective of a group of powers, the international system has been at the mercy of its most ruthless member. By 24 February, this sorry perception came true. And Finland, that had long had a strategy of self-reliance in defense and a prudential foreign policy approach toward Russia, realized in unison that its long-standing strategic posture was no longer tenable. Within weeks of the invasion, there was support of over 80% of the population for NATO membership, whereas it would not have exceeded 20% at the time of the President's New Year speech. A genuine fear of Russia's intentions and the complete loss of a minimal level of strategic trust made the argument in favor of NATO membership overwhelming. The Baltic states were equally powerful in their stance. Only this week, Prime Minister Kaja Kallas of Estonia made this epigrammatic remark: large countries can make mistakes and survive. For small ones, the margin of error is much smaller. The policy to stop Russian aggression in Ukraine is an existential matter for us. This reflection on the strategic vulnerabilities of small states would be shared by the host countries of our two dialogues, the Republic of Singapore and the Kingdom of Bahrain. An important impact of Russia's war on Ukraine is that the geopolitical center of gravity in Europe has moved to the east and to the north. These present and future NATO members are soberly making the case for the defense of Ukraine as a matter both of high principle and urgent security. When some Western European states were emphasizing diplomacy over deterrence or withholding arms to avoid escalation, these new frontline states were arguing for substantial military support to Ukraine, emphasizing that defense was not escalation and defense required counterattack. Even with an enlarged EU, France and Germany can still argue that their cooperation is absolutely key to fueling EU progress. But in an enlarged NATO, and with Russia having attacked Ukraine, it is perhaps the countries of the north and the east who have gained a key swing vote on how NATO analyzes the risk to European security and what should be the principal instruments of defense and deterrence. In security terms, it may soon be the case that Western European leaders explaining the rationale for European defense structures need to speak of Nordic centrality, just as they diplomatically defer to ASEAN centrality when considering the regional security architecture of Asia. Countries in the Middle East and Asia that understandably have grown more uncertain about their security relationships have engaged in strategic hedging. Few security promises are absolute. Having many strategic partners is better than having few. Multi-alignment has its natural attractions and many magnetic pulls. But strategic hedging, rather like financial hedging, requires active portfolio management. As Russia's strategic currency falls, there may be a time when some consider that they are overweight Russia and will have to rebalance yet again. What this conflict has shown is the interdependence between the three great theaters of geopolitical competition: Europe, the Middle East, and the Indo-Pacific. The biggest importers of Ukrainian wheat traditionally have been Egypt and Indonesia. Putin's closure of the Black Sea put the food security of the Middle East, Africa, and Asia at huge risk. Iran's proliferation of UAVs has threatened shipping in the region and resulted in attacks directly against Arab Gulf countries. Now Iranian proliferation has extended to Europe, where their UAVs have been used to strike civilians in Ukraine. Russia's Security Council Secretary Nikolai Patrushev discussed Russian-Iranian security cooperation with President Raisi this week in Tehran. That prospective partnership should inspire closer consultations between Europeans and the Gulf Arabs on a common strategy towards the Iranian challenge. The revolutionary change in the energy landscape in Europe is altering market dynamics globally and has further frayed international relations. Sanctions policies that arise from these geopolitical earthquakes create significant tremors elsewhere. And so the connective tissues between Europe, North America, the Middle East, and the Indo-Pacific in the strategic, economic, political, technological, and security areas are being pulled apart. And it is against that background that the IISS is honored to have President Ursula von der Leyen as our keynote speaker tonight. As Defense Minister of the Federal Republic of Germany, she has attended 3 Shangri-La dialogues and 2 Manama dialogues. When she assumed her present role, she announced that she wished to lead a geopolitical commission. At the time, some cynics thought this a slightly inflated ambition. Yet first the pandemic and then Russia's war of recolonization against Ukraine have imposed that mission on Europe's institutions. The European Peace Facility was used for the first time to fund weapons deliveries in wartime. The Commission has led the way in negotiating a most complex sanctions regime to constrain Russia, and Ursula von der Leyen has been a powerful voice in leading international debate on this issue while continuing its work in many other parts of the world. And as you all know, the President is at the top table in major multilateral institutions, from the G7 to the just completed G20. She is a friend of defense diplomacy, a friend of the IISS, and she comes here as a friend of yours. Madam President, the floor and this podium is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chipman, dear John. Your Royal Highnesses, Your Highness, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, allow me first of all to thank the IISS for its continued leadership and in convening a regional dialogue. And it's a pleasure and an honor to be back here in Manama, in Bahrain. It is so good to see that Bahrain continues to be a driving force for dialogue between countries and cultures. And indeed, since my last visit 4 years ago, Bahrain's achievements have been remarkable. In difficult times for the world, you have been a voice of wisdom and a voice for engagement, and we wholeheartedly thank you for that. I have come to Bahrain, I've come to the Gulf directly from the G20 summit in Bali. This was the first G20 summit since Russia invaded Ukraine. And of course, the summit was dominated by the spillover effects of this atrocious war. Take, for example, food security. The Russian blockade of Ukraine's ports, the deliberate bombing of grain silos, the disruption of Ukraine agriculture, all that is having devastating effects on global food security. And therefore, we welcome yesterday's prolongation of the Black Sea grain deal for 120 days. However, given the uncertainties, we have to boost even more our alternative routes. This is why the European Union just invested an additional €1 billion into linking Ukraine's granaries to our ports by rail, road, and rivers. We call them solidarity lanes. These solidarity lanes have, since the beginning of the war, taken more than 60% of Ukrainian food exports to the rest of the world. This is more than 17 million tons altogether. The second big topic was, of course, energy security. In energy, no one knows better than you in the Gulf that it is all about trust and reliability. And for many years, you have supplied energy to the world to support its economic and social development. This has been transformative for many, many lives and livelihoods. We are now in the middle of a difficult and turbulent period of history. Tectonic shifts in the energy landscape are happening right now. Before the war started, Europe was Russia's biggest energy customer. Today, not even 9 months later, this has changed fundamentally. Russia has unilaterally and deliberately cut 80% of its pipeline gas to Europe. But Europe has managed to replace most of this gas from reliable suppliers. Our storages are full at 95%, and we are safe for this winter. Our challenge will be next year's winter. But at the same time, for emerging and developing countries, the energy crunch is happening right now. They are facing skyrocketing energy expenditures, soaring inflation, and the energy crisis is rapidly leading into an unsustainable debt crisis. Therefore, the world is looking to the key energy suppliers to ensure that these countries that rely on imported fuels and are vulnerable have access to gas and oil at reasonable prices. So much for the immediate crisis. But let me tell you, the tectonic shifts are going much, much deeper. It is climate change that is the pacemaker. You know it all. Desertification is rapidly swallowing fertile land. Devastating floods covered 1/3 of Pakistan this summer. Forest fires raged across Europe, even in Belgium and the United Kingdom. And there is a reason why the largest economies of the world, the G20, reaffirmed the Paris climate goals. The clean energy transformation will take place. And the winners will be those who invest now and who invest massively in clean tech and in necessary infrastructure. Europe is investing massively into homegrown renewable energy. This is our so-called European Green Deal, our growth strategy. But in addition, we will also continue to rely on energy imports. And many of the countries of this region have the natural resources for clean energy in abundance. The wind, the sun, you name it. And you have the know-how on existing and emerging technologies such as carbon capture and storage. This defining change is creating vast opportunities for today's major energy exporters to provide the fuels and the energy services of tomorrow, to diversify into low-emission fuels such as hydrogen, to show leadership in areas such as CCUS. And as a result of these changes, to diversify also their broader economies and to provide a sustainable basis for long-term growth. Of course, what is behind these crises in food security and in energy security is Russia's war. And let me give you a European perspective of what's happening on European soil and the global implications. Almost 9 months ago, Russian tanks rolled across an internationally recognized border with the declared objective to bring down a legitimate government and establish rule from Moscow. But Russia's efforts have backfired spectacularly. It has proven to be a colossal strategic mistake. First of all, the people of Ukraine have fought bravely, with grit and determination, to defend their own freedom, to reaffirm their independence and their right to determine their own future. If Putin was aiming to wipe Ukraine off the map, he achieved the exact opposite. The nation of Ukraine stands today stronger than ever. Secondly, if Putin wanted to divide Europe and its partners and allies, he failed yet again. Sweden and Finland will join NATO. Denmark has removed its defense opt-out, and Ukraine is now a candidate to join the European Union. And thirdly, this war is weakening Russia's economic perspective for decades to come. Our technology sanctions are crippling Russia's economy for the future, and its industry is in tatters. From an energy point of view, Russia has lost its biggest customer. Europe is ending its dependency on Russian fossil fuels for good. From a military point of view, the Russian army has shown its weaknesses and appears overstretched. Its military-industrial complex is lacking chips and spare parts to fix their hardware. The equipment that Russia is throwing at the front line is getting older and older. The conscripts who arrive with it are barely trained and younger and younger. And from a diplomatic point of view, Russia's illegal annexation of 4 Ukrainian regions has been roundly rejected as a sham around the world. It was condemned by 143 countries in the UN General Assembly, including by the overwhelming majority of the Gulf, the Middle East, and North Africa. In sum, Putin has achieved a weaker Russia, domestically and abroad. The European Union is united and steadfast in its support to Ukraine as long as it takes. From the very beginning, we have provided a strategic answer with massive and tailored sanctions, with broad humanitarian aid, with substantial financial support of over 20 billion euros, and for the first time ever, the European Union directly financed military assistance of over 3.1 billion euros. Ladies and gentlemen, my last point is about the international order and how to defend it. There is one recent development that I find very telling. Last January, exactly 1 month before Russia attacked Ukraine, civilians in Abu Dhabi came under fire of Iran-made Shahed 136 UAVs launched from Yemen. Just a few days ago, the oil tanker Pacific Zircon was attacked off the coast of Oman by the very same Iranian drones. And now in Europe too, Russia has launched these very same Iranian drones time and again against civilian targets in Ukraine's cities. These are blatant breaches of humanitarian law and qualify as war crimes. Several Gulf countries have been warning for years about the risk that Iran feeds rogue nations around the world with drones. It took us too long to understand a very simple fact. The very simple fact that while we work to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons, we must also focus on other forms of weapons proliferations from drones to ballistic missiles. It is a security risk not just for the Middle East, but for all of us. And this is why the European Union has already sanctioned Iranian individuals and entities linked to the Iranian Revolutionary Guards that are responsible for providing drones to Russia. And we are coordinating with partners and allies to take further sanctions against Iran, responding to the proliferation of Iranian drones. By teaming up, Iran and Russia are undermining the basic rules and principles of our global order. And where does this end if left unchallenged? History shows that this is a recipe for perpetual war. It is a recipe for arms races and the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. It is a recipe for constant foreign interference, for never-ending violence and instability. And we simply cannot accept this, and we will not accept this. Ladies and gentlemen, the world needs a stronger security architecture against this spread of chaos. We know this in Europe, and it matters also here in the Gulf. Europe is willing to do its part. We want to strengthen our engagement with the region, both economically, but also in terms of security. We want closer cooperation on maritime security, for instance, to ensure safe shipping lanes. And I am also convinced that we should work on a coordinated approach to Iran with a broader focus than nuclear. Gulf security matters to Europe as Europe's security matters to the Gulf. Therefore, we in the European Union will appoint a special representative to the Gulf. So let us join forces for our collective security. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we face historic opportunity to build new ties between our regions for our mutual interest and benefit, for today and for the long run. Thank you very much for hosting me, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ursula von der Leyen. I think it's been some time since I've heard 3 rounds of applause during a speech of this kind, at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. And I think that is testimony to the importance of the remarks you made. I think we can take a couple of questions just before we come down to dinner. And Maria Shagina, if you could stand, perhaps Microphone will come to you from Ukraine, based in Berlin.
Maria Shagina, Diamond Brown Research Fellow for Economic Sanctions, Standards and Strategy, IISS in Berlin. Madam President, the latest EU sanctions package on Russia have seemed to have marked a policy shift in the EU's use of economic statecraft. It includes this extraterritorial dimension that any third party violating EU sanctions will also be targeted by EU sanctions. As we know from the US practice of using extraterritorial sanctions, it's almost always by discretion. So my question is, under what conditions would the EU consider using these new powers, particularly in light of the looming price cap on Russian oil? Thank you.
Yes, so what we have done is we've seen, first of all, I must say, we have, from the very beginning on, worked intensively to align our sanctions with our friends and partners in the United States, basically in the G7, to make sure that we have a very consistent approach. And for the very first time, we have looked at our different trade systems and made sure that the effect is similar, whether it's the American sanctions or the European sanctions on the economic industrial complex of Russia, mainly targeting technologies and spare parts with the devastating effects that you're seeing now in the Russian economy. But what we've also seen that, as always with sanctions over time, there is the attempt to circumvent sanctions. And therefore, we have very clearly established the regime to say, if you are circumventing sanctions in a way that persons or entities are buying European goods and bringing them to Moscow, to Russia, these persons and entities will be listed. So it's a very strong deterrent to make sure that we finish off with this attempt to try. We see very well the trade lines that are being established, goods that are necessary from the European Union and going then via third countries to Russia. Now, what the oil price cap is concerned, I have to say a few more words because it's complex. Yeah. Russia is one of the largest exporters of oil, as we all know, and it is the most important trading good to fill the Russian war chest. That's where the income is. We want to make sure that we use the oil price cap in a way that, on one hand, the revenues in Russia from oil are reduced. On the other hand, that countries and vulnerable countries that need this oil have access to the oil. Now, there are two tracks that are existing right now. A few months ago, we have established an oil ban in the European Union that will enter into force on the 5th of December. It is a complete oil ban. And it is also a ban on financial services around oil shipments. What we're doing now is making sure that we have all the instruments in the European Union in our legal package before the 5th of December, that a general global oil price ban can be established with the other countries that will work in a way that there is for Russian oil a certain limit. If you are at this limit or below this limit for the oil price of Russian oil, then, of course, the shipment and the insurances from the European Union will still be possible. So again, this is crucial. Reduce the revenues of Russia, what oil is concerned, but make sure that there is still a production of oil, that mostly vulnerable countries have access to the oil, and for them, this oil price cap is, of course, something good because it reduces the skyrocketing prices that we have seen partially.
Hassan Al-Hassan, yeah. If you stand up, the microphone will come even quicker. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam President. I'm Hassan Al-Hassan, a research fellow for Middle East policy at the IISS. You describe the Iranian threat clearly and articulately, as ever. Iran is arguably a nuclear threshold state. It's stockpiling uranium that is enriched at higher levels. it's slowly walking away from its international treaty and safeguard commitments. And it has also demonstrated its ability to export its destabilizing footprint through UAVs to theaters beyond the region, to Europe, to your doorstep. You mentioned the need to work on a coordinated approach with your Gulf partners on confronting and deterring the Iranian threat. My question is, what is your strategy? What is the EU's strategy for confronting and containing the threats from Iran? What tools and instruments, beyond the symbolic sanctions, do you intend to put to use to make sure that we can mitigate the risks of an unconstrained Iran?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, 2 or 3 words on, of course, which is in your interest, the JCPOA. We are still negotiating. The offer is still on the table, but what we're also seeing during this time, that the proliferation element is very important for us, and we see still enrichment taking place. So what I want to clearly mention here is there is a certain limit that when it is reached, the question of a JCPOA is over. And therefore it's so important to join forces to look strategically on how to contain the destructive behavior of Iran. You said symbolic sanctions. I heard it very well. We have seen in the case of Russia that sanctions can be, if tailored well, very biting. And therefore, I would say there are sanctions and sanctions and sanctions, different quality of sanctions. I would not underestimate that you can, of course, increase the amount of effect that sanctions have, and much more strategically look at the weaknesses of an economy and at the trade flows that go towards this economy, as we have done with Russia, systematically looked at where the weaknesses are and which kind of goods cannot be replaced, thus to undercut the modernization of an economy. And here I think there is still a lot of room to maneuver. And again, I think we have to listen much more to each other and work much closer with each other to be effective in this case.
I have many questions. I'm just going to take 2 quick ones now and disappoint the 5 or 6 that I can't take. Tobias Elwood, if you stand up and ask your question, and next, Ms. Al-Busaidi from Oman. And Tobias? Yeah? Nope? It'll come quickly.
Thank you. Madam President, you spoke about the international architecture and the need to lean into this. Would you agree that over the last 30 years we've become a little complacent in standing up for what we believe in, what we're willing to defend, what we're willing to fight for? And specifically on food security, an example of that might be that it should not be Russia calling the shots on the grain deal. Is it now time, given they are on the back foot, for the international community to design a new deal to allow all the grain ships to be able to get out? Only 1/5 at the moment are departing, and that is affecting food security, as you say. It shouldn't be Russia, the bully, that actually determines the terms of any deal. It should be the international community.
Well, I must compliment the United Nations for having brokered this deal in an excellent way, and also the prolongation. And you're right, we have to be much more vocal on how is the grain getting out of Ukraine. And as I said, 60% is going via the solidarity lanes that have been in place since the beginning of the war, 17 million tons. And these are the rail, the road, and the rivers that are connecting Ukraine with the European Union. Just to be well understood, the vast majority of these exports are then going to third countries. There's one point in food security I could not address here because it takes too much time, but I think we have to learn the bitter lesson of the food crisis, which is not only the immediate help we're talking about, but to ask ourselves the question how this vast dependency of 2 producing countries, Ukraine and Russia, is possible for some countries. So, for example, the vast dependency on grain exports of Egypt and many other countries. And here, I think, we have to address the food question in a completely different way. Look into new technologies, and the technologies are out there. Make sure that these technologies go to these vulnerable countries. They produce their own basic food, because it cannot be that they are so dependent on basic food for their survival. We've learned this lesson also, if I may hop to COVID. We managed the immediate crisis by exporting our vaccine. The European Union has exported 2.5 billion doses of vaccines. But this is not a sustainable solution. So there we do the same. We are now exporting the mRNA technology, for example, to Africa, to Latin America, and making sure that they build, with our investment, manufacturing capacity, so that the next time when a crisis hits, they are able to produce their own vaccines in the region that needs it. And the same mechanism should go with food security, that these modern technologies of developing food, necessary basic food, are brought into these regions with the investment that is necessary to give these countries not only food security, but also more independence.
And the last question, Madam Boussaidi from Sultan of Oman.
President, my name is Rumaita Al-Boussaidi from Oman and part of the IISS Young Leaders Program. And my question is actually in relation to food security and maybe bringing it close to home. Has there been a way where we as the GCC and the EU could collaborate, for instance, with a free trade agreement that would allow for more movement of food and technology to this part of the world, where we could actually do exactly what you just said in terms of really proliferating more of the food security in the region? And also, as we're talking about climate change and the impacts that it will have directly in this part of the world, is there anything in the horizon that we could actually work together with?
Oh, yes, there's a lot. And indeed, the question of the free trade agreements I have been discussing yesterday with the Crown Prince of Bahrain, because I think we really should move forward on negotiating the free trade agreements. We have 6 countries of the Gulf regions we are negotiating with, and let me tell you, I think if we're too slow, then we should go individually, move forward, and then have the different parts, put them together, because competition is making life often more speedier and more impactful, and I think it's in our common interest. So we have been negotiating too many years. Of course, the European Union is not easy either, so I know that we are sometimes very complicated and bureaucratic, but I will push coming home. I will push forward that we get fast in our negotiations and that we come to results, because it is necessary. And that brings me, of course, again, to the question, your right question on climate change. I mean, I don't have to tell you about the devastating effects of climate change, and this is just the beginning. So if we want to stop climate change, and it is man-made, so we can do something about it, that's the good part in a very bitter story. And here you have not only the technologies, but also the will and the experience to be large key energy exporters. The investment in clean, green energies is crucial. Let me re-emphasize again what I said in my initial remarks. The huge client, the European Union, the huge customer, we are completely diversifying away from Russia. It's over. We are not going to get back to the fossil fuels of Russia. Of course, some of it will be in the short term replaced by LNG. What is the case right now? And we are establishing contracts with our reliable partners. And there are many of you here in the room. The future will be renewable, clean energies because of climate change and also because of energy security, because these are also energy sources that are homegrown. The European Union will always need to import additionally. And therefore, my offer to the region is, let's look into these new technologies. I know you're working hard on them. It's not only the carbon capture and storage, but it's also the green hydrogen that you're working on, the solar energy that you're working on. It is now that the energy landscape of the future is being reorganized. And the ones will be the winners who are the first that have the modern technologies for clean energy and will be the front runners for the rest of the world. So I would be happy about much more cooperation. Thank you very much.
President von der Leyen, what a fantastic speech. What extraordinary mastery of detail in the 4 questions that we had time to take. This conversation could go on, but you have enriched our dialogue. Thank you very much indeed. You've sung for your supper. You deserve a 4th round of applause. Thank you very much.